Hello, everybody, and your Trinity College School of Education. A really sincere thank you to you all for being here this evening. In these webinars, we get to hear from a range of educational policy and leadership researchers from all around the world who really generously share their expertise and insight with us. Last month, we heard from Carrie Conaway from the Harvard Graduate School of Education about leading with evidence, and next month, we will hear from Professor Jim Spillane. However, today we are really lucky and thankful to hear from Professor Ellie Drago-Severson. Ellie is Professor of Education Leadership and Adult Learning and Leadership and Director of the PhD Programme in Educational Leadership at Teachers College, Columbia University. A developmental psychologist, Ellie teaches, conducts research and consults to school and district leaders, amongst others. Tonight, Ellie will draw on her work in adult learning and the potential of educational leadership that develops educators' capacities. And tonight's focus is on teaming. In Ireland, leading as a team has arguably become more important of late, not only because of structural changes in national policy that now speaks of leadership and management teams, but also because of the complexity and volume of challenges educational leaders face on the ground that demand a collaborative response. So that's the kickoff, and now it's over to Professor Ellie Drago-Severson. Ellie, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gavin. I want to thank you, Gavin, for inviting me and for all of the time, energy, love, and care that you've invested into shaping today for all of you. I also want to thank Ann Devitt, and I want to thank each and all of you for being here and for this piece of your time. It's really an honor to be sharing with you, and it's actually an extra special honor because my nephew Thomas is a medical school student at Trinity, and he is on this webinar. So hi T, and so is my husband. I am delighted to be here with all of you today to share a developmental approach to teaming, which has become even more important in Ireland, I know, and is one of the many opportunities that we have, not just to get the work done, but also to be of good support to and for each other. And I'm going to do the best I can to maximize every minute that we have together. I'm really honored to be in your presence. A developmental approach to teaming is really more about building capacity on the inside. It is an approach that is infused with developmental intentionality. And it's today, I'm hoping that you walk away with your hearts full, your minds full, and with plenty of strategies to share with those in your care and also to think about yourself. We're going to just have a quick moment in our go world. I know that in Ireland it's lockdown. And I'm hoping that you experience today sort of as a little oasis from the rest of life, and also as a learning spot. And so we're just going to take about 30 seconds to give whatever is on the top of your mind, top of your heart, a little bit of attention so that we can do our best to push it to the back burner so that we can be as present to and for each other as possible. So just a quiet pause. Okay, that's our signal. Welcome back. I want to begin, as Simon Sinek says, with the why. I know that some of us are school principals, assistant principals, leaders of different kinds, interested in building capacity, not just for children and adolescents, but also for adults, because our own capacities influence how we can be of good support to and for each other. And that is one potential of teaming. So we're going to begin with a little bit of hope. You know, today's a new dawn in the United States, and it's a new dawn in Ireland for teaming. So this is just a little video to start.
Don't tap the days, make the days count. Read a resource smiles today. The best view comes after the hardest climb. One kind word can change someone's entire day. You will never have this day again, so make it count. Dreams don't work unless you do. No one's perfect, that's why pencils have erasers. If you can dream it, you could do it. Don't be afraid to fail. Be afraid not to try. Just because my path is different doesn't mean I'm lost. Take your dreams seriously. You are amazing and don't forget it. You have to be different to make a difference. I am a girl. I'm smart, I'm strong, and I can do anything. Be somebody nobody thought you can be. Believe in yourself. Mistakes are proof that you're trying. Every day is a second chance. Forget the mistake, remember the lesson. When you feel like quitting, think about why you started. You were stronger than you think. Don't call it a dream, call it a plan.
Okay. So that's just a little reminder, you know, from the mouths of children about hope. And teams and teaming are, you know, one of the primary ways that we support adult development. And by development, I'm really talking about transformational learning. While it's really, really important to learn skills, facts, knowledge, what I refer to as encyclopedia knowledge, it's also really important to grow on the inside, growing our cognitive, our emotional, our interpersonal, and our intrapersonal, how deeply we can see into ourselves and how we manage ourselves in complex situations. So that is what I'm going to refer to as transformational learning, and that's really what our talk today is about. Helping educators grow, from my perspective, is leadership development. And I know from talking with Gavin that one of the primary ideas and practices at the forefront of education in Ireland is this whole notion of building capacity at the individual and the team, the school and the systems level. I created this model, which is based on research. And as you notice, there's a little dot in the center of this model. And this is really about, based on my research, how can we create spaces where adults can grow on the inside as well as get the work done, building our own and other people's capacity. And you notice that I'm starting with this, the pebble in the pond. When we put a pebble in the pond, it has a lot of energy. And then it fades unless we refill the dots and refill the self. And while I'm hoping today is a little bit of refilling, I also want to emphasize that our own internal capacities influence how we can support others on teams, in leadership roles, in coaching, and in mentoring. So just by way of reminding us of some of the complexity of today's world, you know, adaptive challenges, which was a term that was coined originally by Ronnie Heifetz, who's a leadership scholar at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. He made the distinction between adaptive challenges and technical challenges. Technical challenges are problems where we can identify what the problem is, and even if we don't have the expertise to solve it ourselves, we can bring someone in, an expert, someone with knowledge in that area, who can fix it for us. For example, I want to give a shout out to Ann Devitt, who has been helping us with technology. And if this technology didn't work today, we would need an expert to help us. That would be a technical problem, which is very important because it would interfere with your learning and this presentation, sharing of information and knowledge. Adaptive challenges, on the other hand, we're in the midst of a triple pandemic around the world. Adaptive challenges are challenges where we can't quite pinpoint what the problem is, and neither can anyone else. Not only that, but they require the internal capacity to handle enormous amounts of complexity and ambiguity. I'm going to invite you in a minute to think about, what is your most pressing challenge when working with a team? Do you think it's technical, adaptive, or some mix of the two? Why am I spending a minute or two talking about adaptive challenges? Well, they are on the rise in our world of new normal, and they connect directly to our internal resources. One big idea today is that we see the world in different ways. I'm going to refer to this as a way of knowing, a meaning-making system, an order of consciousness, because we literally see and make sense of things in different ways. The second big idea is that we need to differentiate to help each other grow, offering both supports and challenges. We need to understand how to do that on teams. And the third big idea is that adulthood can be a time of rich development on the inside, cognitively, emotionally, the way we relate to other people, and how deeply we can see into ourselves, provided that we benefit from context that will support our development. And teaming is one of those contexts. This is really, in essence, about building ourselves and others on the inside. If you look at this picture, this could be a picture of a team. It could be a school team. It could be a grade level team. It could be a vertical team. It could be a systems team. It could be a family team. And there are visible differences that we can see if we look at the picture. But there are also invisible differences. Invisible that we can't see if we're just looking at the picture. We would need to ask questions of people in our care to understand how they make sense of their experience. So in order to thrive and build capacity of different kinds, we need different kinds of learning to help us grow. I talked a little bit earlier about informational learning, informing the self, knowledge, skills. I refer to that as encyclopedia knowledge. On the other hand, there's a different kind of learning which has to do with transforming the way we see the world, make sense of the world. And I said earlier that that is what we're going to refer to as transformational growth, building cognitive, emotional, interpersonal, and intrapersonal capacities. So I'm going to give you a quick 30 seconds just to center yourselves, to think about what is one of the most important challenges that you're facing with respect to teaming. And do you think it's technical, adaptive, or some mix of the two? A quick 20-second check-in for you. Okay, if we had a bunch of days together, which I hope we will in the future, we would have a little bit of interaction here. I would ask, how many of us think our most pressing challenge is technical in nature, adaptive in nature, mixed in nature? The thing is that in today's world, I work a lot. I coach principals and assistant principals, and I work with teacher leaders trying to grow capacity for them as they take on more and more leadership. And during COVID, a lot of people say that normally they think adaptively and approach adaptive problems with adaptive kinds of orientations. But in COVID, in the midst of COVID, a lot of principals and school leaders feel like they don't have much time to think adaptively because there are so many technical challenges that they're facing with hybrid learning, remote learning, online learning, in-person learning, and a mix of all of those. This is the kind of growth that we're talking about. that transformation from the old driver's license of the caterpillar into a butterfly. And when I wrote this book, Leading Adult Learning, I gave it to one of my friends to read, who's also a teacher at Columbia University. And he said, you know, Ellie, you have to put the pain into this book, because growing in teams and growing is oftentimes hard, although very worthwhile. Development is really about being able to take more perspective on ourselves, on other people, and the relationship between the two. That infiltrates everything we do in schools and education. We work so much, not only with children and adolescents, but adults. People often tell me that one of the hardest things, that they feel very skilled up in their content knowledge and working with children and working with adolescents, but what's really hard for them is teaming, is collaborating. Where do we learn to team and collaborate? Normally, you know, a long time ago, we didn't take courses in that. And that's why this work is so important. Collaboration is part of the air we breathe. It's everywhere. Teaming is as well. So my research has focused on these 4 different pillar practices: teaming, inviting adults to engage in collegial inquiry, which is different than reflective practice, because we can reflect on our practice all by ourselves. We don't need anyone to help us with it. We do it when we're running, when we're showering, when we're walking, when we're driving. We don't need another person. To engage in collegial inquiry, we need at least one other person. It is, as I define it, a purposeful conversation that is aimed at helping us to better understand our own and other people's beliefs, values, and assumptions about the teaching, learning, and leadership processes. How often do we do that? What kinds of professional learning opportunities do we offer for people in our care? Are they mostly informational? Are any of them transformational? Which ones would we like to offer more of, and why? The 3rd pillar practice, which Gavin and I have talked about, which is becoming more prevalent, I know, in Ireland, is coaching or mentoring. They're not the same thing, but it's a luxury to have a mentor. And, you know, research shows that we need a constellation of mentors, because we are complicated as human beings, and no one person can help us with all the things that we need help with. I often think about, if you look at the cover of Leading Adult Learning, it is the Picasso's Bouquet in Hands. And I actually asked the Picasso estate if I could put that on the cover of my book, because I love the imagery that when we give, we also receive, in mentoring, in teaming, in offering leadership roles, in engaging in authentic conversations. And in that picture, that image, it's impossible to discern who's doing the giving of the flowers and who's doing the receiving. I get goosebumps all over, because that is the gift of supporting each other's development. And I have the privilege of teaching both in a university setting, aspiring and practicing leaders, and on the ground. And it never feels like work, and I never take it for granted. The last pillar practices is providing leadership roles. How do we think about meeting someone where they are? We see their potential, we see their wings. What kinds of leadership roles from a developmental perspective can help people to grow, but not overwhelm them? If we had a couple days together, I would talk about that. But today, we're going to focus on teaming. And just to begin, we are going to take a little poll, and I'm going to invite Gavin to help us out. Thank you, Gavin. Wow, that was great. So this is an opportunity for you to just center yourself. How many of you have worked on a team where it was, pretty much always easy to collaborate and get things done? How many of us have worked on a team where it was, painful, difficult, challenging to get things done? And how many have worked on a team where it was easy for us to collaborate on the easy things, but harder to collaborate when there was disagreement, conflict, struggle, having critical conversations, having to, in New York City, we have a construct known as push back hard on people's ideas. Okay, so we are filling out the poll. There are 90 people registered for our webinar today, and some of us will be watching this later. So let's see. So 88% have voted. If you look at the results, you can see that 15% say primarily that they work on a team where it's easy to collaborate and get things done. 19% say that it's difficult to collaborate, and 67% of us say that it's easier to collaborate on the easy things and harder to collaborate on the things that are more challenging. Okay, so I am going to move on, and I'm just going to check my time. Okay, I have about 10 minutes or 15. And okay, so we can share results. There we go. I'm sharing the poll results, which I just talked about. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to talk a little bit about a theory known as constructive developmental theory. It is a neo-Piagetian theory, which means it took a lot of ideas from Piaget, who was a Swiss psychologist who studied cognitive development in children at the beginning parts of his life, and then later moved on to moral development. I want to give my teacher, Bob Keegan, a big shout out. Woohoo! I have taken his theory and pioneering work and extended it to the pillar practices, which I'm going to be talking with you about over the past 30 years, working with school leaders like yourselves to think about how might this theory help us in several different ways to meet people where they are, to offer psychological stretching to help them grow when they're ready, and to remain in place while they're demonstrating new internal capacities. This is a theory that helps us to be more compassionate, that helps us to understand that we all don't have the same internal resources. And I am going to give you a quick sketch of these different ways of knowing that we make sense of the world in adulthood. And I'm going to say that in today's world, leadership actually demands more of the self-authoring capacities, which are those capacities that Stephen Covey, a man who dedicated his life to understanding what is it that highly effective people need to do in their work. And he came up with 8 habits of highly effective people: owning one's work, beginning with the end in mind, seeking win-win, seek first to understand. Those are not just habits, and I have great respect for Stephen Covey and his lifetime work, but they're also developmental capacities. No matter how hard we want to turn toward difficult conversations and engage in conflict, there are different things at risk for people who make sense of their experiences in different ways. I'm going to introduce these, and I'm going to invite you to think about a way of knowing as actually like a pair of glasses. And we wear these glasses all the time. We sleep with them on, we're awake with them on, and they filter how we see on the outside and how deeply we can see into ourselves. You'll notice that on your screen, there are 4 different pairs of glasses to represent the 4 different ways of knowing. This is not about intelligence. Someone can be off the charts IQ-wise and be making meaning with any one of these 4 different ways of knowing. There are 3 primary ways of knowing in adulthood. And the reason I'm bringing these up is because it's important to think about these when we work on teams. So the instrumental way of knowing is the first one, where adults orient to the world in a very concrete way. So what they would like to do is they would like to get what they need from other people. I'm going to say a little bit more about this. With every way of knowing, we have developmental strengths and we have growing edges. This is not Carol Dweck's work about growth mindset versus fixed mindset. While a person with any one of these ways of knowing can have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset, it's going to look different. It's not about Myers-Briggs. Are we introverted or extroverted? Are we sensing or feeling? This is about a structure of mind. And I'm going to use a quick example before we get to teaming. For instrumental knowers who orient to the world in a concrete way, if you were to ask them what constitutes a good friend, they would say, a friend is someone who doesn't get in my way. A friend is someone who doesn't tell on me when I do something wrong. A friend is someone who gives me what I need. For socializing knowers, if you look at the red pair of glasses, they have developed the capacity to stand in another person's shoes, to take on their perspective. They can push their own needs, desires, and interests to the back burner because they are primarily concerned with your approval as their friend. For someone who grows to be a self-authoring knower, they can care about you and have a value for their relationship and friendship with you. But for them, a good friend is someone that they can disagree with, that they can speak their mind, that they can have a difficult, critical conversation with. And if they are arguing and have different perspectives, they can leave that conversation and still be friends. The relationship is not at risk. And for adults who are more self-transforming in their way of knowing, they are concerned with critiquing their own internal system. They have grown to be able to do that. They recognize that they have areas within themselves that they have not grown, and they seek to be in relationship in a different way than socializing knowers. They seek to explore contradictions and paradoxes in an ongoing way in themselves, in their relationships, in the world. So what does all this have to do with teaming? Well, for instrumental knowers, they orient to the world in a rule-oriented way. Now, I know that rules are important to all of us. We have to follow mandates. We have to follow policies. But what are we doing that on behalf of? For an instrumental knower, their primary orientation is, how can I get the things I want and need? That's how they orient to the world. The rules run their thinking, their feeling, their being. For them, these are little synopses of what they expect out of teams, how they orient to teams. If everyone would just do and learn what they're supposed to do, we'd make progress and get things done. We'd get them right. Can we please just have the time and resources, the things we need to be a good team? For socializing knowers have developed greater internal capacities, as I've said before. They really have primarily an other-focused self. Their reality is co-constructed. What's running them is the approval of the team leader, the principal, the assistant principal, the supervisor, the authority. They need other people to feel whole. Conflict literally rips them apart. It's almost like other people, important, valued others, are their mirror. What you think of me, I think of myself. So on a team, what is their preoccupying concern? Their preoccupying concern is, how can I say something that won't offend my colleagues, the team leader, especially when we're talking about sensitive subjects, race, diversity, equity, conflict of ideas. I don't want to disappoint them. For self-authoring knowers, these are adults who can do those things that Stephen Covey advocated for in his life. They have a reflective self. They have their own internal bench of judgment, their own internal standards, rather than seeking on the outside to do only what authority figures want them to do. They want to take in their perspectives, but in the end, they're going to decide what it is that they want to do. For self-authoring knowers, being a team leader feels really supportive because they have an ideology that is running them, a government, and their preoccupying concern is, am I staying true to my own values? Am I working, living, leading, loving up to my fullest capacity? When on a team, their primary orientation is, it's important to me that I have a chance to share my perspective and opportunities to offer my critiques. I'm open to your ideas, but in the end, I decide for myself what's my best next step. And if I'm a team leader, I do the same thing. Self-transforming knowers in today's complex world have grown in capacity in numbers. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that later, because the world has become more complex. Some people say because people are living longer, and also because people are forming communities where they help each other grow. For them, their primary concern and oriented concern is, how can we learn from each other and grow together? For them, and these are direct quotes, my colleagues help me to see into myself in new and different ways and to work in new and different ways. Transformation is not possible without learning from contradictions and paradoxes, especially those we're living in. Think about how important that is in today's world. So my colleague, Jessica Bloom DiStefano, and I wrote a book very recently called Leading Change Together. And one of the things that we've done is we have put forth the idea that we can't just skip one way of knowing and jump to the next. Higher is not better. Higher really depends on, we have implicit and explicit demands that are placed on us every day as leaders, as teachers, as learners, as parents, as siblings, as partners. And oftentimes the demands that are placed on us exceed what we can do on the inside. That's why growth is important, and we need each other to grow. We're all in this together, and teaming is a structure that can help us do that. The smallest percentage of adults, according to research in the United States primarily, but also in other countries, are concrete thinkers, instrumental knowers. The next highest, you notice that this is like a tree ring moving outward. The highest are socializing knowers, either socializing knowers solidly or socializing knowers who have a little bit of instrumental knowers in their meaning making. Watch the bands. The next are people who are more self-authoring and socializing as we grow, or self-authoring and self-transforming. The tree rings show that these are all connected. We can't jump to the outer ring, and we can be making meaning with more than one way of knowing as we are growing. Context is also very, very important. What we're trying to think about when we assess our own and other people's ways of knowing are, what are our growing edges? What are we aware of that we're doing, and what is running us? That is what is known as the subject-object balance. But as I said before, it's really all about perspective taking. We all need teams and holding environments that can help us grow, that are not just about getting the work done, but also about helping us to engage in real conversation about difficult things, to say what's on our hearts and minds, sort of like the lobster. As the lobster's growing, it needs to break out of that shell. And when it is out of its old shell, moving into growing a new shell, it needs shelter and shade. So these are some, big takeaways that I want to offer to you. And I look forward to talking more about teaming with you and to addressing your questions. So these are some practices that are developmental in nature. Establishing real living norms. Oftentimes teams, I work with district teams and teacher teams, And, they'll call me in and ask me to do some workshops on feedback, a developmental approach to feedback, getting better at giving and receiving feedback in teams. And then sometimes they'll say right before I'm going in that, on our team, we have a little trust problem. What is that? There's no such thing as a little trust problem, or we can't really communicate, especially across lines of difference. How do we get better at that? My first question usually is, do you have norms? People say to me all the time, oh yeah, but they don't mean anything. How can we build real norms, especially during COVID, where we're teaming on and offline? And it's hard. We don't get to have those conversations that we used to have passing each other in the hallway necessarily. Building real norms, asking each other, how can we create spaces that feel safe, where we can be brave, where we can be vulnerable? Brene Brown, vulnerability as strength. How do we do that? Even if teams develop a few norms around what are we going to do when things aren't going well, and how are we going to manage conflict, it can be enormously helpful. The second is checking in around expectations. It's new expectations and sort of rebooting our old expectations, especially during COVID, where we're doing a lot of work together on Zoom or other platforms, making space to check in about our new expectations and the old ones that we used to have. Sharing our communication preferences in teams. How often do we ask each other in teams, how would we like to give and receive feedback? Here's a really important one. What would we like to change about our team at the individual level and the collective level? What would the individual team players like to get better at? What would they like their team to get better at? Taking surveys, asking people, what do we think we're doing well and what do we think we need to improve over time can grow teams and grow capacity. And it's also really important, the conversation around that. What happens when teams hit rough waters? What are the big dilemmas that you're facing in your team? Are they technical, adaptive, or mixed? Sometimes just introducing this idea that not all of our challenges go into the same container can be really, really helpful. Teaming is, really important. Collaboration is part of the new normal. It's what we do each and every day. And it's vital to our success and to our children and to moving forward in the future. So thinking about teaming from a developmental perspective can really help us. I was recently visiting a school in Chicago, and I thought I would share this with you. This is a first grade classroom, and this team of 6 and 7 year olds, Chicago in the United States and Illinois, made their own norms. And look at the brilliance of these young children. We promise to work together to help our team succeed. We stay safe, we play fair, we work hard, we use our time to learn. And every day, they all signed this agreement. Every day at the beginning of the day, they sit around these norms and check in on them. And when they leave, they check out to see how well they did during the day. And so we can learn so much from children and each other. And I wanted to, before moving into the Q&A, I wanted to share two things. One is these are bamboo trees, and I never knew that. You can water bamboo trees, you can feed them for years and years, and it looks like they're not growing, and it often looks like nothing's happening. And then all of a sudden, they can grow 3 to 5 feet in what feels like a second. And that's development as well. Sometimes we're building teams, we're making norms. It's hard work, but it is very, very worthwhile. It takes time. And it also is like anything that we want to get good at. We have to practice We have to stay with it. How do we build muscles? We work out. And this is an invitation. I'm hoping that some of these ideas are helpful to you in your practice of teaming and of helping yourself and other people grow. The last thing I want to leave you with is a little bit of hope before we get to the questions. This is a video called Be a Rainbow for Other People. And in today's world,
there's an African-American song, 19th century, which is so great. It says, when it looked like the sun wasn't gonna shine anymore, God put a rainbow in the clouds. Imagine. And I've had so many rainbows in my clouds. I had a lot of clouds, but I have had so many rainbows. And one of the things I do when I step up on a stage, when I stand up to translate, when I go to teach my classes, when I go to direct a movie, I bring everyone who has ever been kind to me with me. Black, white, Asian, Spanish speaking, Native American, gay, straight, everybody. I say, come with me. I'm going on the stage. Come with me, I need you now. Long dead, you see? So I don't ever feel I have no help. I've had rainbows in my clouds. And the thing to do, it seems to me, is to prepare yourself so that you can be a rainbow in somebody else's cloud. Somebody who may not look like you, may not call God the same name you call God, if they call God at all, you see? And may not eat the same dishes prepared the way you do, may not dance your dances or speak your language, but be a blessing to somebody. That's what I think.
okay, so we have time for your questions, and I'm going to turn it back to my friend Gavin.
Thank you very much, Ellie. Thanks for sharing all of the thoughts you've had on this important topic and for all of your research as well, and really doing in a very short space of time what would take us by ourselves a very long time. So thank you so much for taking the time to prepare that and share it with us today. As I mentioned, it's something I think that's on everybody's agendas in the Irish context, because I think obviously, you know, I've mentioned at the outset today that there have been reforms in the Irish setting to encourage more collaboration between those that are formal leaders. And I suppose one of the first questions I have for you is maybe again, just to touch on the constructive developmental theory for practicing as a leader, mostly because I think you and I maybe are both familiar with this idea that people say often, you know, I just want to focus on practice, and theory feels like it's so far removed. So what good is it to me? So what good is constructive developmental theory then to leaders from your point of view as somebody who's studied it for so long?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. So as leaders, you know, in any context, we really have the privilege of being responsible for the adults in our care. This theory is a theory that helps us to understand that, you know, I think a powerful example is that, you know, leaders do evaluations and they often give the same feedback over and over and over again to someone. And leaders might wonder, you know, why is it? I mean, a real life example is I coach someone who's a principal, and he said that it took him 3 years to understand that when he was giving feedback to other people, they can't really take it in the way that he gives it. Mm-hmm. I mean, what good is it then? He said that he likes his own feedback straight, no sugarcoating, just give it to me right away. And he was trying to do that with his teachers, and he wondered why people were not able to do what he was asking them to do, because he was not giving them feedback in a way that they could hear it. we're all in our schools trying to build capacity. Leaders need to grow too. And, you know, this is really not just about other people. It's also about growing the growers. Leaders are responsible for growing other people. And if we're not growing ourselves, we might not have the internal capacities to support people in our care who are making meaning with different ways of knowing. So, you know, I guess my work is really about the bridge between theory and practice. How can practice inform theory, and how can theory inform practice?
Yeah. And I think that's really beneficial, because oftentimes we get so caught up between, say, policy and practice that we forget, you know, if a policy is talking about, for example, mentoring or feedback or teaming, as the case may be, theory can actually kind of break us out of the shackles of the restriction that policy sometimes can impose on us. And also maybe perhaps help us deal with less the technical challenges and maybe more the adaptive ones. Would that be fair to say?
Yes. One of the most common problems that's cited by practitioners and people who, you know, live outside of, you know, K through 12 practice is that we often approach adaptive problems with technical solutions. And think about that. When one doesn't work, we just go try another solution. And when that doesn't work, we try another one. Whereas sometimes what's called for is a different approach, an adaptive approach to solving adaptive problems. The thing about adaptive challenges is that they often require us to change or cultures to change. And, you know, we know how easy it is to change a culture, right? That's a joke. That's a joke. It's not easy. It's hard.
It's tough. And as you talked about today, that norm creation is really labor intensive, not only in the very obvious sense of labor, but I'm sure, you know, affectively and emotionally intensive work as well.
Very much so.
So one of the questions, I guess, actually touches on that kind of affective domain a little, but also connects in with maybe that comfort zone that we can associate with socializing ways of knowing. And one of our participants today, Chris, was asking a question about really trying to move in a team whereby many people might be socializing in terms of their way of knowing. How do you move beyond that into a more critical realm? Would you have some advice there, Ellie? Which of the tips you shared or others might be most useful in that situation?
Yeah. You know, I was actually giving a talk yesterday to a group of assistant principals in Brooklyn, New York, who are aspiring to become principals. And one of the principals asked this really heartwarming question. He said he is more of a socializing knower, and he's in this position where he has to give a lot of feedback, and some of it's really critical in nature. And he finds that that's really hard, not just for him, but for teachers to receive it. And so, you know, one of the things that I really advocate for is to introduce this idea of development to teams as one theory, you know, and one kind of way that we can build a stronger team, and to talk about how we make sense of our experience in different ways. You know, an idea is even to talk about what do we find ourselves developmentally strong at, and what is our backhand or growing edge, and to let others in on it. You know, it's amazing. I've watched this happen over and over again, not just on teacher teams, but on cabinet teams, school and district leadership teams, where people begin to use this language of development in teaming to talk about building norms from a developmental perspective, to say, look, one of the things that we're not good at, we're really good at talking to each other in our practice about what we do well. But one of the things that, you know, someone could take responsibility for it, I feel like we're not so good at, is that when conflict bubbles up, you know, I mean, teachers tell me, I ask them all the time, what do you do when you're disagreeing? They often say, nothing, nothing, nothing. We just avoid it. We just do it ourselves. I mean, in today's world, that's really, really hard. We need each other. So I think one of the best things we can do is introduce a developmental approach to teaming. Invite people to create real norms. You know, teachers always tell me, not fake norms. Oh, we have norms, but they're fake norms. You know, they don't really mean anything. But if we can work together in teams to say, you know, as a team, I think we're very socializing, and maybe we can help each other grow to have an agreement around what's going to happen when we actually disagree with each other. We are going to, you know, bare our souls, take a chance, have a buddy to support each other in our growth and practicing that. You know, a lot of times in my coaching work, I'll say to a coachee, you know, have you thought about saying ... And the person will say, oh, no, I could never say ... but I think I could say ... And that's a start, you know, baby steps. That's what's going to help us.
Yeah. And I mean, I suppose many people at the minute now, you mentioned earlier on as well, Ireland's in lockdown at the moment. So schools were working remotely. So teams are also by default working remotely. Are there challenges that are presented by teaming in an online environment, Ellie, that are simmering in the research that you've been conducting at the moment that maybe we could learn from as well?
Oh, so many, you know, so many. One of the hard things is making space to check in. You know, it's kind of like we are in a series of sprints. Think about our lives today. We go from one Zoom to the next Zoom to the next Zoom. There's no transition time.
Yeah.
And every minute is so precious. And a lot of teams are, you know, missing the in-person contact, missing the chance just to check in. How are you today? You know, what's on your heart? You know, today we didn't have a check-in, but we did have a pause. Pausing in teams from the go, 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 go can really create a space. Offering a little bit of space, you know, to check in on each other. How are you doing today? It can be a pass or play kind of a thing. You know, if you want to share, you can, but you don't have to. Investing 3 to 5 minutes on that can make a world of difference. You know, someone said to me recently, I really don't have time to do that. We have so much to do at our school. And I said, I think you really don't have time not to do it. This is a team that's not working well together around the tough things. Just a little check-in, starting with the small things, especially during lockdown, can make a tremendous difference. We need to differentiate our care for people as well, especially during a lockdown situation like exists today.
Yeah, and I think many people here from the Irish context would really connect to that, given the emphasis on well-being as a national policy across all primary and post-primary schools.
Yeah.
That's what you've been talking about as well, Ellie, touches on that point you made about developmental approaches being ones which are led with intentionality. And that's really key when you are deliberately going around changing norms, I suppose, where it might feel like small and steady, just will never lead to the transformation you talked about too in your talk earlier.
Yes. And, you know, one of the things that I've learned from working a lot with teachers and other kinds of leaders is that, you know, in the teacher context, oftentimes teachers feel safer as a first step in setting norms with their students in their classroom. You know, and you can think about norms in a multidimensional way as well. So there are technical norms, like on Zoom, we're going to mute or we're going to have our faces shown, or, you know, there are lots of technical norms, raise your hand, unmute, but then there are also adaptive norms. And those things are important on Zoom just as they are face-to-face. Teachers often, not always, but I know many who have practiced building norms with their students first before doing it with the adults.
Yeah. And in fact, you see many really appealing kind of infographics online now where these have been shared and kind of formed with, I think, students in mind and reflecting student voice as well, which is really powerful stuff. One question I have connects to this idea, I think, of hierarchy, Ellie, in a team between middle leaders at different grades and perhaps the most senior leader, the principal in the school. So say, for example, that you have middle leaders and possibly even the more junior middle leaders who are adaptive, but your principal is more technical, possibly an instrumental way of knowing. How long should you wait, the question is, for the culture to change? Or is it time to stop trying and just to avoid conflict? Is it easier to make your circle of influence and just take small steps? This is from one of the participants.
What a wonderful question, you know.
Tough one, nonetheless.
A tough one. You know, it depends on where you know, it takes time and energy. You know, being an educator, I think, is really a gift of love. And that giving is fragile. So, I mean, you know, Mahatma Gandhi, be the change you want to see in the world. Sometimes it's really helpful to find a way to speak your truth. And in that case, I would give it a try and see what happens. Introduce the idea of development. This is not about lowering expectations and not holding people accountable. You know, in that case, with the leader who might be making meaning of his, her, or their experience with a less complex way of knowing, you know, maybe introducing this idea of development, talking about how our own internal capacities influence how we can be of support to our school, finding the commonality, what's in common. We all care about children. We all care about helping them to grow and develop and their wellness. And our wellness influences children's wellness. You know, it's kind of like on an airplane. The first announcement is always, if something happens, put your own mask on first before you go to help someone else. And if you're feeling like you have enough oxygen to help that leader, I would go for it and introduce these developmental ideas.
And I think the theoretical framework gives a nice graded kind of approach to, as you say, going slow and steady, but not resigning to inaction either. One more question. I'm conscious that the time is coming up to the hour for yourself, but also for the participants, is how would you advise approaching teaming in a group that doesn't see itself as a team? Perhaps doesn't use that language to describe what they're doing collectively.
That's really interesting because I recently gave a talk to the European Society for Research and Adult Development, and teaming it's not a word. I mean, I remember I was talking with the person who was leading this particular initiative, and he said, you know, we don't use that word here. We don't. If you start talking about teaming, they won't know what you're talking about. And he invited me to think of another word. So collaboration, working together, you know, kind of relates to, you know, so I would want to ask some more questions. If the team doesn't feel like a team, what do they feel like? Do they feel like they're working together, or do they feel like they're working separately? Do they want to work together? Do they want to build a better connection with each other, both to get the work done and to help each other grow? I mean, we have to start with readiness, and you can't make someone do something they don't want to do. So I guess my first set of questions would be to, you know, tap in and take a temperature in terms of where are people at and where would they like to go.
And I think one of the things too, maybe that comes from having thought this issue through as you have, is that there are implications for leaders at all levels, not only the most senior leader to make the team work in the organization, but also I think leaders trying to influence upwards perhaps as well.
Yes. Yes. In one of my research projects, the leaders called that managing up.
Yeah.
You know, leading up, supporting people's development who have positional authority.
Mm-hmm. And I guess that touches on the very heart of what we've discussed today, Ellie, which is that in terms of development, developing oneself, sometimes the greatest nourishment to achieve that is in developing others. It's this reciprocal, bi-directional relationship that so often we believe is just unidirectional. For example, the mentee only learns from the mentor, and so on.
Yes, goes back to the Picasso, bouquet in hands. Who's doing the giving, who's doing the receiving? I think it's both and, you know, it is reciprocal. That's a great way to frame it, Gavin.
Mm-hmm. Well, on that note, Ellie, as we come up to the hour this evening, I'd just like to say from everybody here in Dublin, in Ireland, and all our international guests on the webinar as well, thank you in the United States for sharing so generously all of your ideas and research and the thoughts and care that you've given us today here in our webinar together. So thanks again. And I hope that we can see each other soon. And take care, everybody, and have a great evening.
Me too. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and it's been a real privilege. Thank you all.